The truth about craving, why the Buddha says you need it. Ajahn Lee often makes the point that people who've studied a lot of Dhamma, when they come to the practice, want to let go of things too quickly, things they actually need to hold on to. They know that at some point on the path, they're going to have to let them go, so why not let them go right away? He talks about how craving can actually be good. We know that it's the cause of suffering and that someday we're going to have to abandon all forms of craving. But, as he points out, if you don't have any desire, and the words craving and desire basically cover the same thing in Pali, if you don't have the desire, you don't have the craving to practice, the path is not going to happen. Similarly, with the three characteristics, everybody hears about things being inconstant, stressful, and not self, so they want to let go of the 5 aggregates right away. But we need to hold on to the 5 aggregates in order to develop the path. The things that are stressful, you learn how to make easeful. The things that are inconstant, you learn how to make constant. The things that are not yours, you learn to bring under your control, at least to some extent. It's only when you've pushed against these 3 characteristics that you can actually find out exactly where they are. You push against them by developing the path, getting the mind into concentration. And it's something you hold on to while you're developing it. While you're sitting here, hold on to the breath. The image that they give in the forest tradition is of a red ant. They have these big red ants in Thailand that live up in mango trees. If people climb up in a mango tree to get mangoes, the red ants bite them, and they bite hard, so hard that if you try to pull them off, sometimes the head detaches from the body, and yet the jaws are still holding on. So hold on to your breath with the tenacity of a red ant. There will come a point where you let it go, but you're not going to get to that point unless you hold on first. The same principle applies even to some of the fetters. The canon lists 5 higher fetters: passion for form, passion for formlessness, restlessness, conceit, and ignorance. Of the 5, only ignorance really has no role to play in the path, although Ajahn Lee says that even ignorance has its good side. Once you know you're ignorant, that gives you the motivation to want to find knowledge, but ignorance itself doesn't help. You've got to know the 4 noble truths from the very beginning to get a sense of what the landscape is and what you've got to do. But the other 4 fetters have their good points. They're actually useful. You don't let them go until you've gotten some use out of them. For instance, with conceit, the sense that I am. We're not talking about the conceit of pride, but simply the idea that I am. I know some people who say that when you're working with karma, you've got to realize that your intentions are simply the result of causes and conditions. They don't have anything to do with you, but that doesn't give you any motivation to try to make skillful choices. Those people say you have to let go of every sense of I because it causes you trouble. Well, it's actually necessary for certain skillful decisions. Their approach is like putting up a ladder on the side of your house, cutting out all the rungs and saying, okay, float up to the roof. If you cut out the rungs, the 2 sides just fall apart. You have no way of getting up at all. There are some things you've got to hold on to first. Passion for form is what gets you into right concentration. The Buddha himself says that if you don't have the pleasure that comes from the first jhana, or better, then no matter how much you know about the drawbacks of sensuality, you're not going to be able to let it go. You're going to keep coming back. So to overcome sensual passion, you have to develop passion for form. Similarly, with a passion for formlessness, the dimensions of the infinitude of space, the infinitude of consciousness, the dimension of nothingness, the dimension of neither perception or non-perception, are levels of concentration you can get into because you enjoy them. There's delight there, passion, desire, delight. Granted, these are fetters. Think of them as chains. Some chains you can actually use to pull yourself up. Say you're at the bottom of a well and you have a chain in your hand. You toss it up, get it wrapped around a bar or a tree branch above the well, and then you can pull yourself up with the chain. When you don't need the chain anymore, then you let it go. Similarly, with conceit and restlessness. Restlessness is the sense that there's more work to be done. If you don't have that sense of restlessness, you're not going to do the work. That together with your sense of self, the sense of I am, those are really useful for making progress on the path. I've heard some people say that the approach of the path is to put the mind at ease. Will it to rest in a state of equanimity? Will it into a state of patience and acceptance? But there's very little thinking that goes into that. In fact, it actively discourages any attempt to think or to figure things out. But that's not the kind of person the Buddha was. The Buddha was very inquisitive. He wanted to figure things out. Precisely how do you act in a way that's going to give good results? And what are the choices available to you when you act? When you make a choice, what's happening there? Do you have the freedom to choose? The Buddha assumed freedom as part of the path. The types of teachings that said we have no freedom of choice at all, because everything is totally predetermined. Those were not among the options he even tried to explore. For one thing, you can't explore that principle. How can you test something like powerlessness? He wanted to explore freedom of choice. How far can it go? If you don't have a sense of yourself as wanting to make progress, you won't put in the work. That's where conceit functions on this level. Think of what the Buddha said about renunciate distress. It's what you need to get yourself out of ordinary householder distress. You think about the fact that there's a state of peace that others have found, but you're not there yet. That realization, even though it's a little bit painful and not at all easeful, does make you inquisitive. It motivates you to follow the path. That renunciate distress is a combination of restlessness and conceit, and it's what makes you look at the spot in the mind where there is freedom of choice. How does that happen? There are causes and conditions, but as the Buddha said, sometimes there's a cause that comes together with the effect, and then it disappears together with the effect. In the present moment, there's a freedom to choose causes like that. If we can't assume that, then there's no sense in a path of practice at all. But what is that freedom? Where is it? How can we take advantage of it? That's the big point. How can we take advantage of it? The more you explore it, the more you hover and circle around this point, the sooner you'll ultimately find that it does lead you to a different kind of freedom entirely. It's like going through a black hole into another universe, but one that's a totally different dimension, outside of space, outside of time. It's there. Notice that voice that keeps trying to make choices. What next? What next? The assumption of the mind that has that constant, what next, what next, what to do next, does assume freedom. Freedom to choose what to do. If it didn't assume freedom, it wouldn't ask the question. That's the whole point. We're asking questions as we practice. And any teaching that discourages questions, especially questions about what's skillful and what's not, has to be put aside. It's not helpful at all. Our motivation for wanting to ask those questions is the sense that something's wrong. There still is suffering. There still is stress. Even if it's very subtle, there's still stress. and I want out. That combination of restlessness and conceit is what forces you to ask the questions, and it's going to give you the answers. So even though these things are fetters, passion for form, for formlessness, conceit, and restlessness, they're the type of chains, as I said, that you can actually use to pull yourself out of the well. Then when you're out, you don't need the chains anymore. You can let them go. As you read the Dhamma and try to apply it to your own practice, remember that some things are good across the board and some things are useless across the board. But then there are some things that are going to have their uses sometimes and have to be put away at others. Learn how to recognize them and get the most out of them. See how far you can take them, and they can take you before you throw them away. Training your desires. All phenomena are rooted in desire. Everything we experience, the Buddha said, and we desire happiness. So the question is, why don't we get the happiness we desire? Because our desires are ignorant. We're ignorant of the way things work. We want to put in only a little effort, or no effort at all, and get a happiness that lasts. We've learned, of course, at least to some extent, that that doesn't always work. There's a large part of the mind that really doesn't like that. It's when we realize that we have to change our understanding of what works and doesn't work, and that we have to train our desires. That's when wisdom begins. We realize that we can't get everything we want the way we want it. We have to learn to choose what we really want more than anything else and focus on that. As the Buddha says, if you see that a greater happiness comes from letting go of a lesser happiness, and if you're wise, you're willing to let go of the lesser happiness for the sake of the greater. There was an English scholar who translated that verse one time, and in a footnote, he said that this couldn't possibly be what the verse means. It was just too simple, too obvious. Well, it may be obvious, but it's really not the way people live. We want to win at chess and keep all our pieces. We want our major desires, and we want our little desires. We don't want to have to give anything up that we want. It's when we realize we do have to give certain things up, and we have to prioritize, that we begin to bring some knowledge to our desires. The Buddha said it's a several-step process. First, you realize that you need some training from other people who are more experienced than you are in terms of what brings true happiness, and you have to look for the right people. When you find someone who seems reliable, you have to watch that person for a good while. Ask yourself if there's anything in this person that would make this person want to claim knowledge of things he or she didn't know. Would this person ever get anyone else to do something that was not in that other person's best interest? It takes a while to observe a person to be able to judge this. But if you're truly serious about trying to find true happiness, you have to be responsible about who you choose to hang out with, who you choose to listen to, and who you choose as your friends. There have been so many cases of people finding out that their teachers are unreliable. But when you ask them what led up to the revelation, it turns out that there had been warning signs they chose to ignore. So there's a certain responsibility placed on the student to try to find a good teacher. Then you spend time with the teacher. When you have a sense that the teacher is trustworthy, you listen to what the teacher has to say. You think it over. When it makes sense, that's when the Buddha says, you begin to have a desire to do the practice. The example of the teacher has shown you that it is possible to find true happiness, a higher happiness than what you already have. That gives you some impetus to want to make some changes in your behavior. Then you listen to the teachings, and if they make sense, that gives you even more impetus. A really good teaching opens up your perspective on what true happiness is, so that you're willing to let go of lesser things. That's how the desire to practice begins. And that's why the Buddha defined ignorance as ignorance of the Four Noble Truths, not ignorance of the three characteristics, ignorance of the Four Noble Truths, because they revolve around desire. There's the unskillful desire that causes suffering. Then, there's the skillful desire in the Noble Eightfold Path, under the factor of right effort, that leads to the end of suffering. The skillful desire wants to develop all skillful qualities in the mind and abandon all unskillful qualities. That's the kind of desire you want to encourage. But the Four Noble Truths also set out the possibility of finding an ultimate happiness that's unchanging and true, total freedom. That is a human possibility, and the Four Noble Truths set it out clearly. They don't say, for instance, that you simply have to accept the fact that there's going to be change in life, so just accept the change. Or that things are impermanent and stressful, so accept the impermanence and stress. Or that things are not self, so accept that they're not self and content yourself with that. That's not what they say. The Four Noble Truths say that ultimate happiness is possible and can be gained through human effort. And the proper way to respond to that is to see it as a challenge. Here's a possibility as to what you can do. Do you want to accept that challenge? If so, look at the other things you've been doing in life that would get in the way. Can you learn how to say no to them? As the Buddha said, a measure of your wisdom is when there are things you like to do, but you know are going to lead to suffering or harm, and you can say no to them. Things you may not like to do, but you know are going to lead to long-term welfare and happiness. Teach yourself how to want to do those things. In this way, you're training your desires in the direction of a happiness that's really reliable. And it is possible. It can be done. There are people who found it. Good people, reliable people. Now, you can't see their happiness. Ajahn Mahabua said that if you could take Nibbana out and show it to everybody, that's the only thing anybody would ever want. Everything else in the world would pale by comparison, but you can't see someone else's experience of it. Still, you look at the people who seem to have found it, and they seem to be good people. That's the beginning of conviction. It's not knowledge, but it's conviction. The conviction that gives force to your desire to want to practice more. Otherwise, it might seem that nobody in the world is really awakened, or the best anybody can do is just accept things as they are and not try to make any changes. But then, what kind of effort would you want to put out? It would be very discouraging. There'd be no reason to make any effort at all, no desire to make any effort at all, and you'd be stuck where you are in a situation that's really not acceptable. When the Buddha talks about accepting things, it's not about accepting where you are and staying there. It's about accepting the fact that you're responsible for shaping your life and that things could be better if you trained yourself to shape your experience in a better way. That way, if you're going to look for the cause of suffering, you have to look inside. That's another message from the Four Noble Truths. Again, it's a message that we may not like to hear. We like to blame our suffering on other people. But think about it. If your suffering comes from other people, what are you going to do? Are you going to change them? And how many people in the world would you have to change? There'd be no end to it. But as the Buddha points out, suffering comes from our ignorant craving, and that's something we can do something about. Ignorance may have been long-lasting. As the Buddha said, you can't trace back in time to find the point where ignorance began. but it doesn't have any right to lay claim to you. Ajahn Suwat's image is of taking a light into a place that's been dark for who knows how long. The darkness can't say, "We've been here ever since time began," so this light has no right to chase us away. As soon as there's light, the darkness has to go. As soon as there's knowledge, your ignorance goes. Regardless of how ignorant you've been in the past, it's something you can change. The Four Noble Truths set a high standard, but they also promise a lot. They provide a path we can follow, and it leads to true happiness, ultimate, unchanging, unlimited happiness. When you think about that, then whatever is required on the path doesn't seem so onerous. It doesn't seem so scary. It doesn't seem so large. The happiness we want is much larger than what we have. We have to keep that in mind at all times. So when you find yourself getting lazy, ask yourself if this is the best you can do. Is this how you show your desire for true happiness? By making excuses for your laziness? Try to encourage the diligent internal chatter that the Buddha talked about when he cited the reasons for laziness and the reasons for being diligent. The outside situations are always the same. You may say, "I've been traveling a lot," or "I've been sick," or "I didn't get much to eat this morning," and make that an excuse for not practicing. But you can also say, "I was traveling a lot. I didn't have a chance while I was traveling to practice, but now I have the chance. I've been sick. I didn't have the chance when I was sick, but now I have the chance to practice. When I don't eat much, the body's light. It's not weighed down by all that food. It's a good time to practice. How you talk to yourself is what's going to make all the difference." That's where you see wisdom in action. So try to get some wise voices in on your internal conversation. Inform them with the Four Noble Truths and teach them to train your desires so that they really do lead to the happiness you want. Or, as the Buddha says, a better happiness than your desires can imagine. At the very least, encourage the desires that try to imagine that kind of happiness. Then make sure those desires actually do take control of your actions, so that in accepting what really does lead to happiness, you can do what's needed to get there.